Last week, Trump said that things were falling apart in Sweden. This triggered a amazing response, as I'm sure you recall. I'm sure you remember, the reactions from the libtards was that Trump had made up this terrorist attack in Sweden, right, the night before. This was not the case. It was simply, with some level of ambiguity, of course, that he was referring to the general situation in Sweden with crime, violent crime, drugs, gangs, rapes, all that kind of stuff. So he'd been watching a report on Fox News. They had a filmmaker there, Amy Horowitz, talking about his experiences being in Sweden, measuring the success of multiculturalism. And it was frankly a pretty modest segment. It was airing on Tucker Carlson's show. So increase in crime is through the roof in Sweden. Some estimates are as high as, 1,400%? Since a few years back. And the fact is we didn't have these levels of crime in Sweden before immigration. It's just a fact. But since the Swedish state doesn't keep statistics on crime by ethnicity, it becomes occasionally difficult to get this point across. And it's difficult for people to realize that this change in the criminal landscape in Sweden is not attributable to a drastic change in the introvert nature of most Scandinavians. It's a very, and it has been a very, very peaceful country, maybe even too peaceful. So it's only with rapid demographic change that this behavior is starting to change. So what happened is that CNN and other fake stream news outlets, media had on all kinds of people on their shows discussing why Trump was wrong and why what he said wasn't true. Several guests even made guarantees and ensured us that everything is as it should be in multicultural Sweden. Don't worry. And also in other European countries that he was referencing, that has this diversity edict, this religion enforced on them. So the response from our politicians, the State Department, the Swedish Embassy in the US, and our Prime Minister was one of disbelief, right? Everyone was perplexed and said, we have no idea what he's talking about. What is this, So even an ex-Prime Minister, the Bilderberger Carl Bildt, even went so far to accuse Trump of smoking something in one of his tweets. So as a consequence of this disingenuous reporting, lies, people think that all of this is fake, the general people out there. That our concerns are not real, that we are making all of this up, and Trump is making it up. It's all fake news. So other replies to Trump that I saw included, are you saying that the Swedish government is lying? Right? So they have now begun to channel the spirit of the good old days of Pravda. Only the state disseminates the truth. And you objecting to it is not double plus good. So never in human history has a government lied to its people, right? It just doesn't happen. So obviously the answer to this is pretty simple. Yes, they are lying to us. The government is not only lying, they're covering it up actively. So despite the fact that CNN and most liberal press outlets in America criticizes official statements themselves coming out of the White House and their government basically, with Trump in it now, they're too blinded to realize that we are just simply doing the same. People like us in this room, we're also we're expressing our concern with the fact that our government is lying, just like they are. But again, because we live in a liberal, multiculturalist, socialist, utopia here in Sweden, they have to reinforce this image all the time that things are great. So they're too blinded by their own liberalism to realize that we are just exercising the same muscle that they are. And we're calling out the media and the government for their endless string of lies and their fake reports. So despite years of degrading situation with stories after stories from the mainstream mind you, about how police are losing control in many areas in Sweden. We are still not allowed to connect the dots and begin to see a pattern. That is the crime, right? Despite official statements from the chief of police in Sweden, Daniel Eliasson, how surprised he was about the levels of crime, how much it's gone up in the country. The police and the government has now abdicated their responsibility of keeping us safe. And in some cases, they've even explicitly said so. So they are not keeping their citizens safe. They admit that they've lost control in some areas. When you talk about no-go zones, you're crazy, right? Police are quitting, they can't do their job, etc. So in other words, the contract that we have between us now, the state and the people, really the one primary function that initially the state had to offer was security and law and order. That's out the window now. They have failed providing this. So Swedish police even has a special code, as I'm sure you recall, R296, where they file reports related to immigrant and refugee crime. These are simply not publicized. They're hidden away. They're actively covered up. Even the day after they attacked Trump for what he said, his comments, it turned out that he was spot on. As the Stockholm suburb Rinkeby once again turned into a riot zone with car fires and stones being thrown, at fire trucks and police cars and everything else. And they were there to take care of the people, of course, and de-escalate the violence. We also had a police officer, as we mentioned here earlier, out of Örebro, Peter Springare, recently came out, as a critic of multiculturalism, posting sincere diatribes on Facebook, and all against the orders of his superiors, of course. All he was simply talking about was the absolute horrible conditions that the police have to endure in diversity-ridden zones. He also discussed the losses that our society is taking on other fronts as consequences of the enforcement of the multicultural utopia, such as the pressures on schooling, the crumbling healthcare system, a collapse of the infrastructure, the lack of dwellings for new Swedes that are supposed to start up their life, get a family going, who end up in kind of arrested development because the state prioritizes the recently arrived, as the new PC speak goes. And they just don't give a crap about their own young people. In the same way, they don't give a crap about the old people either. The state is now cutting back food from old people, literally in homes, in order to pay for this crazy multicultural party that they have got going on here. So what's the response to all of this, with Trump and all that stuff? Well, it's cover-up, of course, as I said, denial. Police made it forbidden to even show photos of the flowers that came in support of Peter Springare, the police officer. Came in from all over the country. And, he was actually investigated for hate crime, consequently. Malmö, for example, as one of my favorite immigrant he's an economist, says that's the third biggest city in Sweden. Malmö. Malmö had 52 hand grenade attacks in 2016 alone. That's a jump from 48 attacks in 2015, according to the figures provided by the Swedish Police Authority. So this is the new normal, right? We just have to adjust to this. And all of this goes on as Dagens Nyheter, DN, or Today's News, attacked Daniel Friberg, myself, Tor, ultimately you, for attending a conference like this. They're attacking us while they have their own reporters and photographers assaulted in Rinkeby just the other night during these riots that Trump kind of predicted in a Keckian fashion. So 15 people came up and kicked and punched this photographer. They stole his camera. He ended up spending the night in hospital in complete shock. He was just out to cover these riots, and probably even from a kind of a semi-supportive perspective, right? That doesn't help. Crime has gone down this year in Sweden, one liberal pointed out, to Trump after his comments. And this is how they think, right? So 1 point down on the chart after 20 years of a massive increase of how many endless points up, right? So it's now progress and signs of improvement that, it's just slightly gone down from a little bit from before, from the previous year. They cannot imagine that these 20 years of increased crime and open borders shouldn't have been at all, right? They are trying to argue that 2 steps forward and 1 step back is not actually taking us forward towards the cliff. And all of this is happening as another gang rape here in Sweden was live streamed this week. Business as usual. Well, to the establishment and their lackeys and the cheerleaders in the fake stream media, it's you and me and people like us here who are the problem. Not the problems itself. Not this insane radical immigration policy that is plunging our country and the European continent and America into chaos. No, we are the problem. We are the dangerous ones. Not the libtards that are undermining our society and our security and the future of our children, who is rapidly turning the next generation of Europeans into minorities in their own countries. Us bringing information together, connecting the dots, seeing a pattern, that is the problem. Pointing out how they are failing and the Pravda establishment is going belly up now, that makes us a dangerous element in their eyes. So if reality doesn't matter, if real observable things in reality in the real world doesn't matter, what is it that we are fighting? We're fighting perception, right? We're fighting a way of seeing the world, a way to process reality and analyze the real world. We can ask, what is happening and what is all this leading to? But this simple, equation, this simple algorithm, or this simple, figuring it out, seems to be too much of a brilliant chess move for some of these people to perform, as they barely can predict the direction of their own nose would point if they turn around. So I think this is also at the heart of the Swedish dilemma and the Swedish mentality that enabled us to end up in this situation. Avoidance, right? We keep avoiding the issues and we think that they will go away. At some point, it will just go back to normal. And if we just stick our heads in the sands, everything is going to be great, right? And if there ever was a problem, by the way, which there is not, we can't admit that, right? So, but if there was a problem, then some kind of authority would step into the picture. It would take charge. It would let us know about it, and it would try to fix it as soon as it could. But this is a lie, like most things are these days, that they seem to be, that come from the leading narrative. So as George Orwell famously said, in times of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And whether we like it or not, I've never been a fan of revolutionaries myself, but we are the revolutionaries now. We are the ones that both the state and the international globalized world of commerce is trying to crush for simply pointing out the truths that we aren't supposed to notice. It's a war on noticing all of this, right? So we Europeans are just supposed to lay down and go belly up. But that's not what's happening now, is it? And one thing that we had to our advantage now is obviously Trump, as so many people have said, but it bears repeating. It's just brilliant to have a guy in there like this guy who is so unpredictably, or that so unpredictably at many times seem to channel the spirit of Keck and bring attention to many of those things that have been covered up. It forces the establishment to address a lot of these issues. So what we're fighting is perception and denial, complete denial of reality itself. This is something that's not easy to fight. People pick and they choose what kind of world they live in. We've been gaslighted into this very narrow view of the world. So my observation is that we are fighting, what we're fighting is kind of like a cult that not only turn on their own friends and work colleagues, that violates the rules of this cult, but they turn on their own family. That's actually a warning sign of a cult in itself, as experts would tell you. That is, when you only start surrounding yourself with people that think exactly like you, and they disconnect from family members and friends that aren't willing to go along with their kooky version of reality, then something is wrong, right? That's a warning sign. And of course, some people would maybe attribute that to us, and they say, well, it's you guys that are, cult people or whatever. But the truth is that I think most people I've met, most people I talk to, they have never disowned their own family member for being, on the left or something like that. It just doesn't happen. Nor have we never wanted to discuss or listen to people that think differently. Or in some cases, we've even reached out and tried to discuss with people, and they just don't want it. So they are the ones who are exhibiting this cult-like behavior. And even though they are, for now, in the majority, that doesn't mean that we're not dealing with a toxic cult that's causing misery and ruin for families and normal people. Cult members often end up blocking out people and their ability to communicate to those with a different view of theirs. So how do we fight this cult, right? This irrational dedication to an insane issue like multiculturalism. So the way to fight cults have changed over the years. They used to hold people against their will, do interventions with friends and family members and experts or whatever to deprogram them from the sucky values that they've been coerced into by believing their leader or something. So today it's a little bit different because the whole media landscape that we have against us, they're running the cultural narrative, is enforcing the message of the cult all the time. It's a constant reinforcement that they are correct and that we are wrong, and they are rarely subjected to different information or dissenting opinions. That's why the media is holding all of that out as well, because they can't be exposed to any of this. So what they're saying, if they do, touch upon it, is a foreboding warning and say, these are dangerous people and stay away from them and yada yada. So it's almost like a parasite that's trying to inoculate itself from the very thing that would flush it out. But cult members, when you approach them with a criticism that their cult is no good, well, they block you, they disown you, they run away and fight you even violently in some cases. And I know countless of people that have had their own family members, their own flesh and blood, disown them just for having different views of all of this. So we often feel that perhaps, and perhaps rightly so, that it's no use to try with these people, that these people are just too intolerant to different ideas, dissenting views, they are just too deeply embedded into the matrix and they will never accept a red pill or the red pill. And it's hopeless to save them. And despite that this cult members doesn't care enough about you as a friend or as a family member to even just listen to what you have to say, shows, of course, what kind of friend or blood relative that they really are. So while I'm not suggesting you waste your entire life trying to unplug deeply, committed cult members, I do have to say that we have to try to stay on these people harder than we have and not give up so easily. Push them on some of the ideas that we have. Push some of these people, challenge them, at least as if it's a family member. As far as I know, you've already, lost them and they had, shown their true colors. So in true Nietzschean fashion, as they say, that which is falling should also be pushed. So push them. The way that some people propose you deal with cult members is that you make an effort to try to communicate with them, even if they shut you off and shut off those means. So in conclusion here, there's two paths that I see. One is that life will awaken these people per automatic, right? As reality comes in on them, as they experience things that doesn't correlate with the version that their cult leaders and the media and the politicians and Hollywood and all these people are telling them. So this might cause them to ask questions and to find people who discuss reality on a far more rational, comprehensive manner, who offer some answers. What is it that's going on? Is all of this good? Where is this leading? So the second part of that is that we need to, I think, continue to stay on some of these people, as I said. Just because they are the majority doesn't make them in the right. This is a logical fallacy. Because the masses believe something doesn't make it right. These are related to mass hysteria of dangerous mass movements, fanaticism. It's the road to the Western world that's currently is on. This dangerous path of mass hysteria. It's a cult, in other words. It's destroying our countries. It's destroying the future of our children. So I think that we need to get louder and talk about the reality that we see. Stay on people, ask them to tell us what they gain from this world that they defend so much and protect to such a degree that they're willing to disown their own son or their own daughter or their own brother, mother, father, etc. What if the women, as you said, Lana, that are subjected to this kind of violence that the state denies actually started speaking out in mass number, making videos or testimonies, getting out the word, being loud about it? There would be less and less denying it. And we would be tipping the scales of reality itself into our favor, like we already are. So in other words, we need to break the silence that we have been so accustomed to, especially in this country, in Sweden. But this house of cards is going to fall sooner or later. It's happening now. The reality of this cannot go on forever. Something will have to give. Either the fabric of society itself and the deniers will be forced to look at it, or it will turn before that point. And it will be enough if we actually wake more people up. I'm not sure. But the subtitle, if you will, for this conference was Rise from the Ruins. And as far as I see it, the ruins are being made right now. We are not making them, but we can certainly utilize them. And although it might be seen as an act of desperation to say this, when we do hit rock bottom, society speaking, we will have nowhere to go but up. And perhaps it's a bit of desperation and a bit of destruction that we need to wake from our slumber. Thanks.